"You don't belong in this seat. Please move." The words weren't whispered. They were said loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. 13-year-old Elodie Harrington froze mid-reach for her seatbelt. Row 2A, window. Her name on the boarding pass. Her name in the airline's system. Her name now being questioned. A man in a tailored navy suit stood in the aisle beside her, looking down like he was shooing a child out of a private club. Next to him, the flight attendant smiled tightly, not kindly. "We've had a mix-up," the attendant said. "This seat is reserved for our Diamond Elite member." Elodie blinked. She was already in the seat. She had been for 5 minutes. Her bag was stowed, her coat folded. She had smiled when she walked in, just like her mother taught her to do when people doubted her. Smile, but don't apologize for existing. "I have a valid ticket," she said softly, holding it up. The attendant barely glanced at it. "Yes, well, we think you'll be more comfortable in economy." Comfortable. Because first class wasn't built for girls like her. Not at 13. Not traveling alone. Not quietly minding her own business. She looked around. No one intervened. No one questioned why a child with the right seat and right ticket was being told to leave. She stood up, and every eye that had been avoiding hers suddenly watched her retreat. Down the aisle, past judgment, past pity, past the comfort her mother had paid for. "Tell us where you're watching from, and be honest. What would you do if that were your daughter?" 35 rows back, the seat smelled faintly of disinfectant and lost dignity. Elodie sat without a word. She didn't cry, didn't ask for a supervisor, didn't reach for the call button. She opened her backpack, pulled out her EquaSure tablet, and powered it on. In the corner of the screen, her access code pulsed gently. Temporary Ethics Delegate, L. Harrington 13. 3 days earlier, she'd sat across from her mother, Marianne Harrington, CEO of EquaSure, who handed her that very device. "I trust you," her mother had said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're the only person on my team not driven by ego or money." "I'm a kid," Elodie said. "You're the only one who remembers what fairness feels like." She had thought it was ceremonial, something symbolic to give her a sense of responsibility while her mother attended the Global Aviation Summit in Geneva. But now the system was needed. Elodie tapped the icon with the scale. The Flight Ethics Index opened. A long list of flights appeared, all coded, all monitored by real-time behavior metrics, sentiment detection AI, and staff accountability logs. She tapped her flight, EQA 611, clicked Flag Incident, selected Tier 1 Violation, Age Discrimination. Category, Unjust Seat Reassignment. Context, First Class. Minor, Valid Ticket. She hovered for a second, then remembered her mother's voice, last night over a secure call from Switzerland. "You're not asking for revenge. You're asking for integrity. Proceed." Elodie hit submit. Nothing changed in the cabin. No alarms, no blinking lights. No one gasped. But thousands of miles away, a red flag triggered at EquaSure headquarters in Toronto, and at a network node in New York, and at 3 international insurance terminals in Zurich, Frankfurt, and Heathrow. Because when a flight ethics delegate flags a Tier 1 breach, all corresponding insurance policies are paused, pending investigation. Meaning, the airline couldn't file claims, the airport couldn't verify staff clearances, and a 740-mile web of contracts just froze. All because a 13-year-old refused to be quietly erased. Back in 36F, Elodie closed the tablet. She leaned against the window and exhaled. The man in 2A swirled his whiskey. The attendant smiled and poured another. Neither of them knew. Not yet, but they would. The sky stretched endlessly outside, but so did consequence. Elodie didn't smile. She didn't need to. The system was already speaking louder than she ever could, and this time, it was listening to someone her age. The rest of the flight moved on like nothing happened. Flight attendants smiled and served champagne. Passengers in first reclined comfortably. The man who had taken Elodie's seat looked entirely at peace, like he'd won some kind of social lottery. But 30 rows back, Elodie Harrington sat perfectly still. She didn't fidget, didn't glance at the cabin crew. She just watched the slow pulse of the clouds outside and listened to the quiet churn of something far more powerful than any boarding pass. She had submitted the ethics flag 15 minutes ago. No response yet. But that's how the system worked. Quiet, methodical, unforgiving. Most people thought insurance was about numbers. They didn't know it could take down an airline. Thousands of miles away, at the Equasure Ethics and Oversight Office in Geneva, a notification appeared on an encrypted dashboard. Flagged flight, EQA 611, filed by L. Harrington. Classification, Tier 1 breach, minor passenger displacement urgency, high, international leg, Frankfurt. Marie Abadi, Director of Ethics Monitoring, squinted at the screen. She'd seen hundreds of daily reports. Most were noise. But this wasn't a normal flag. This came from a delegate access code. She typed a short command into the system and pulled the manifest. When she saw the name Elodie Harrington, she blinked twice, then sat upright. On board, Elodie unwrapped a granola bar from her bag. Her stomach wasn't hungry, but her mind was restless. She watched as a flight attendant passed by. Not the one who'd removed her, but a younger one. Nervous, maybe new. Their eyes met. He looked away. Elodie said nothing. She didn't want attention. She wanted accountability. Behind her, someone whispered, "She probably snuck into first." Someone else laughed. She didn't turn around. At Skylink's headquarters in Atlanta, a high-priority ethics compliance alert pinged in the C-suite legal group. Normally, these were handled quietly, but this one came with a note. Temporary override in place. Compliance freeze advised until internal review clears. By 9:22 a.m. Eastern, all auto-renewal insurance certificates connected to Equasure were paused. 3 Skylinks operated terminals at Frankfurt, Heathrow, and Dubai sent system alerts. Risk class reevaluation in progress. Passenger ethics standards flagged. Which meant this wasn't a glitch. It was a lockdown. Back in seat 36F, Elodie's tablet lit up again. A simple notification blinked. Incident escalated. Policy freeze initiated. You may disconnect. She closed the screen. Her fingers trembled, but not from fear, from restraint. She thought of all the times her mother had told her what power really was. It's not yelling louder than them. It's knowing when you don't have to. The lights in the cabin dimmed as they approached cruising altitude. The man in 2A reclined deeper, eyes closed behind designer sunglasses. Elodie watched him, just for a second, then looked away. 1 row behind him, another passenger, a woman in a navy pantsuit with an Equasure badge half hidden under her scarf, received an encrypted message on her smartwatch. She checked it, froze, then tapped a number. "Geneva just pinged us," she whispered into her AirPods. "Tier 1 flag, EQA 611. You're not going to believe who filed it." Silence on the other end. Then, "Proceed with visual confirmation. We'll prep the post-landing protocol." She hung up and adjusted her seatbelt. So the kid wasn't just a passenger. She was holding a detonator, disguised as a tablet. By the time the plane passed over Newfoundland, the news had reached the International Aviation Standards Consortium, ISC, and the FAA Ethics Unit, and ACAO Geneva. Because when a minor with delegation authority submits a Tier 1 ethics flag against a live flight, international air travel compliance protocols are forced to respond, or risk losing multinational insurance coverage. The result: 3 ongoing Skylinks negotiations were frozen mid-contract. $740 million in pre-cleared funding for expansion terminals in Brussels, Nairobi, and Kuala Lumpur was halted. All first-class bookings on partner airlines were flagged for urgent behavior audits, and not a single person on that flight knew, except the girl in 36F. 2 hours into the flight, the head purser made her way down the aisle. She stopped near Elodie's row. "Miss Harrington?" she asked, her voice careful now, the kind of tone people use when they realize they've made a very expensive mistake. Elodie looked up. "Yes?" The purser swallowed. "I'd like to apologize on behalf of the crew. There appears to have been a miscommunication regarding your seat." Elodie stared back, silent. "We've arranged for a full refund, and if you'd like, we can escort you back to your original seat, right now." Elodie glanced around the cabin. Some heads had turned. A few passengers were already murmuring. She shook her head gently. "It's fine. I'm okay here." "But," she looked the purser in the eye, "I'm not here for comfort. I'm here for clarity." The purser hesitated, then nodded. As she walked away, Elodie heard her whisper into a headset, "She knows." Somewhere over the Atlantic, the story had already begun to leak. One tweet from an anonymous staffer at Equasure. Rumor, teen flagged her own flight for ethics breach. Now 3 terminals are locked. Flight justice. Within minutes, the hashtag was trending. Elodie tucked the tablet away. She opened her robotics workbook and scribbled a note in the margins. Systems are only as ethical as the people behind them. She didn't want an apology. She wanted precedent. And now she had it. By the time the wheels touched down in Frankfurt, representatives from Skylinks Europe, Equasure, and IASC were waiting at the jet bridge. The cabin crew was informed. No disembarkation until further notice. Passengers grumbled. The man in 2A looked confused. The flight attendant who'd asked Elodie to move looked pale. A voice came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are undergoing a routine inspection. We appreciate your patience." But it wasn't routine, and everyone knew it. Elodie leaned back. She had no reason to rush. This wasn't the end of something. It was just the system whispering back, and for the first time, it had whispered in her voice. The plane sat still on the tarmac, engines humming softly like a guilty secret waiting to be told. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Whispers turned into questions. Someone asked the flight attendant if there was a bomb threat. Another muttered something about this generation always causing problems. But no one knew. Not really. Not yet. Elodie sat quietly in 36F, legs crossed, her hand folded neatly in her lap. She watched the sun set against the skyline of Frankfurt through the window. To her, it felt like the world had stopped for just a moment to watch something that wasn't supposed to happen. Actually happen. For the first time, the system wasn't protecting the ones in power. It was protecting her. In the front of the cabin, the man who had taken Elodie's original seat was growing visibly annoyed. "I have a meeting in 45 minutes, he barked. "This is unacceptable." The head purser had returned, sweat collecting at her temples, headset still crackling. "Sir, we're cooperating with an international ethics audit. Please remain seated." "An ethics what?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Not when even she wasn't sure how deep this went. In Frankfurt Terminal 3, an entire lane at customs had been blocked off. 3 suited representatives from Skylinks stood stiffly next to a man in a black overcoat, an ethics liaison from Equasure Europe. His nameplate read, D.M. Calderon. He was holding a briefing tablet, eyes locked, mouth tight. On his screen, a profile of Elodie Harrington, and a red blinking status, emergency delegate, flight ethics override active. He turned to the Skylinks rep beside him. "Did anyone brief the crew this girl had clearance?" "No," the woman said. "They had no idea." "That's going to cost you." Back on the plane, Elodie finally powered off her tablet. She slid it back into her carry-on. A soft chime rang overhead, followed by the captain's voice, steady, professional, but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, Thank you for your continued patience. We are currently undergoing a coordinated debriefing with airport officials. We'll be landing gateside shortly. No one clapped. Everyone knew this wasn't just turbulence. As the aircraft door opened, a hush fell over first class. The man from Equashore boarded without a word. He made eye contact with the head purser, nodded once, then looked down the aisle until his eyes found her. Elodie. He walked the length of the cabin, the soft thud of his polished shoes the only sound for 30 rows. He stopped beside her. Miss Harrington? Yes. I'm Damien Calderon, Ethics Liaison, Equashore Europe. She nodded slightly. He offered a hand, not to shake, but to help her up. Protocol allows you to remain on board if you wish, but a delegation is requesting a formal debrief, and your mother has asked that I personally escort you to the review floor. Elodie stood without a word. All around her, silence. No one asked where she was going, but the look on their faces said it all. Wait, she's the one? Inside the terminal, a discreet corridor had been sealed off from public view. At the end, a glass-walled room with 6 chairs, 1 long table, and a black conference screen mounted on the wall. Elodie entered first. Damien followed. Seated across from her were 3 people. A Skylinks VP, face flushed. A representative from the International Aviation Standards Consortium, calm but tense. And a woman in a gray suit from the Federal Transport Ethics Council, already typing notes. They didn't speak for several seconds. They just looked at her. A girl in a hoodie and sneakers, holding the airline industry in a chokehold without raising her voice once. Then the woman from the council spoke. Miss Harrington, do you understand the extent of the cascade triggered by your submission? Elodie nodded. I do. Do you stand by your report? Yes. What was your intention? Elodie didn't hesitate. Not to punish, to prevent this from happening again. The woman paused, wrote that down word for word. Meanwhile, outside the terminal, things weren't as calm. Someone had leaked the internal suspension memo. Flight justice was trending in 12 countries. Footage of Elodie walking down the first-class aisle, recorded discreetly by a fellow passenger, was already online. Her boarding pass in hand, her head held high. The comments were brutal. Why are they humiliating a kid with a paid ticket? She handled it better than most adults would. Airlines better start learning names before they move people. And then came the bombshell. A former Equashore staffer tweeted, "You don't just move a flight ethics delegate. That's like telling a federal judge to change seats on a train." Back in the debrief room, Elodie sipped water from a paper cup. The IASC representative leaned forward. Miss Harrington, your report has triggered a 740 Meller hold across international airport partnerships. 3 terminals are grounded, and our internal integrity rating for Skylinks has dropped below the threshold for global compliance certification. She looked at him calmly. Then I guess the system is doing what it's supposed to. He sat back. The Skylinks VP shifted uncomfortably. This was a misunderstanding. Surely the response is disproportionate. Damien Calderon, who had been quiet, finally spoke. She didn't move the system. You did. By removing her. Silence. Then the councilwoman turned to Elodie one last time. Miss Harrington, as per protocol, we'd like your recommendation for how this should be resolved. Elodie thought for a moment. Then she said, retrain your crews, reevaluate your ethics thresholds, and until that's done, suspend first-class ticketing on all Skylinks flights. The room froze. The VP's jaw dropped. That would destroy us. It'll rebuild you, she replied. Fairer. 2 hours later, Skylinks Europe's board voted to temporarily freeze all first-class ticketing. An emergency bulletin was sent to all staff. Ethics protocol revision in progress. Do not override passenger assignments without clearance. And back in the arrivals lobby, a familiar voice echoed across the tile. Elodie! She turned. Her mother, Marianne Harrington, stepped through a security gate, escorted by a diplomatic officer. They hugged, long, tight, wordless. Marianne stepped back and looked into her daughter's eyes. "You didn't panic. You didn't cry." Elodie smiled for the first time all day. "You said the system would listen." Marianne nodded. "It did." That night, as mother and daughter rode quietly to the Equisure residence in downtown Frankfurt, headlines buzzed outside the car windows. 13-year-old flags airline for ethics breach. 740 members suspended. Global policy reform underway. She had the right seat and the right to stay in it. Elodie leaned her head against the glass, exhausted but clear. She didn't win because she yelled. She won because she knew what silence backed by structure could do. And now, so did the world. By the time Elodie and her mother stepped into the black car waiting outside Frankfurt International, the headlines had exploded like wildfire. Not just in Europe, not just in America. Everywhere. 13-year-old whistleblower freezes 740 million in aviation contracts. Who is Elodie Harrington? First-class mistake cost Skylinks access to 3 global terminals. The passenger they shouldn't have moved. Inside the car, Elodie scrolled quietly. Even verified users on X were asking, how does a teenager trigger an international aviation freeze? The short answer? She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She just knew where the leverage lived and how to pull it. Back at Skylink's global headquarters in Atlanta, chaos was mounting. 3 senior compliance officers had resigned. The CEO's assistant leaked a memo that read, "We were not informed that the child carried temporary delegate status. No notice was issued to cabin crew. This is a catastrophic protocol failure." But that wasn't the worst of it, because someone had pulled Elodie's full clearance record from Equisure's internal delegation log. And when it leaked online, the world saw the truth. Elodie wasn't just a kid with a tablet. She had been granted temporary power of attorney over the Flight Ethics Index review mechanism, a rare authority usually reserved for high-level executives or senior ethics officers. The internet lost it. So basically, she could halt any plane midair if she wanted to. Wait, who is her family? Now this ain't a passenger. She's a walking compliance shutdown. And then came the video. Someone from the debriefing room had recorded the moment Elodie looked the Skylink's VP in the eye and said, "You didn't move a child. You moved the person reviewing your entire system." It hit 6 million views in under 9 hours. Meanwhile, Elodie sat quietly in the Equisure penthouse in Frankfurt, her hoodie still on. She didn't feel famous. She didn't want the attention. What she wanted was system change. Marianne sat across from her, sipping black coffee. "They're coming for your credibility now," she said, scanning the comments on the screen. "Calling you spoiled, entitled, saying you're too young." Elodie gave a small shrug. "I'm too young for first class, but old enough to audit the ethics system?" Marianne smiled. "That's my girl." The next morning, 3 major airline CEOs, including Skylinks, were summoned to an emergency international aviation ethics hearing. The location? Brussels. And yes, Elodie was invited. Not as a witness, as the person who triggered the hearing. They gave her a name badge that read, E. Harrington, Delegate Auditor, Equisure Ethics Division. She didn't ask for it. She didn't decline it either. Inside the hearing chamber, things were tense. Executives fidgeted. Reporters waited outside, sniffing for any scrap of drama. And at the back, Elodie sat beside her mother, quiet, observant. When the committee chair banged her gavel, the room fell still. This hearing is in session to determine the systemic failure that allowed a verified passenger holding Tier 1 ethics override authority to be removed from her seat in direct violation of ICAO compliance standards. Skylinks' legal counsel stood up. "Madam Chair, with respect, our crew had no way of knowing." The chair raised a hand. "Correct. You had no way of knowing. And that is precisely why your first-class access has been revoked across all major airports until further notice." Gasps rippled across the room. And then, "Unless," the chair added, turning to Elodie, Miss Harrington has a recommendation. All eyes turned. Elodie looked down for a beat, then raised her chin. If I may speak freely? You may. Elodie stood. Removing someone based on appearance, assumption, or age is not a failure of training. It's a failure of culture. Some execs shifted in their chairs. I don't want you to apologize to me. I want you to design a system that can't make the same mistake twice. Silence. Then she pulled a thin file from her backpack and placed it on the podium. This is a draft of the Passenger Fairness Accord, a new protocol that requires ethics screening for both crew behavior and passenger treatment patterns. It integrates machine learning assessments into your check-in and seating process, not to replace people, just to remind them that behavior leaves a digital trail. Her voice was calm, clear, no wobble. Sign it, implement it, and you get your terminals back. That was it. And she sat down. Like she hadn't just reset the rules for the entire international airline industry. By the end of the day, the accord had been signed by 5 major airlines, including Skylynx. The chair looked at Elodie once more. You did this without yelling. I had nothing to yell for. I had proof. Outside, reporters mobbed the steps. One leaned in as Elodie passed. Miss Harrington, do you think this moment will change the way young people are treated in first class? Elodie paused. I don't care about first class, she said. I care about being treated like I belong wherever my ticket says I do. Then she walked away. That evening, back in the Frankfurt flat, Marianne watched the coverage unfold. She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She just watched her daughter, curled up on the couch with her laptop open, eating crackers. And she whispered under her breath, "They still have no idea what you just did." 3 days after the Passenger Fairness Accord was signed, Elodie's inbox exploded. Not with fan mail, not with hate either, but something far more complex. Requests for meetings. From who? A senior advisor at the International Civil Aviation Organization, 2 major airport boards in Canada and Singapore, a deputy director from a privacy oversight committee in DC. They weren't angry. They were cautious. Because what Elodie had done wasn't just bold, it was systemic, and systems don't like to be corrected by 13-year-olds. Back in Frankfurt, Elodie sat on her bedroom floor, cross-legged, a cinnamon bun untouched beside her laptop. She was reviewing data packets pulled from Equisure's predictive ethics engine. Something didn't add up. Passenger sentiment toward the new accord was high, but airline compliance adoption, flatlining. Even among the 5 airlines that publicly signed the accord, only 2 had begun integration. Skylynx wasn't one of them. Meanwhile, inside Skylynx HQ, a quiet rebellion was brewing. The internal comms team had received direct orders. Do not reference the Passenger Fairness Accord in public-facing statements. Refer to the Frankfurt incident as an operational misunderstanding, not a violation. And worst of all, pause implementation of new behavioral metrics. Legal is reviewing exposure. Translation? They were stalling, trying to wait out the wave, hoping the attention would die down, and with it, Elodie. But Elodie wasn't just waiting. She was watching, and she had data. After checking the internal compliance trail from Skylynx's hub in Chicago, she flagged 2 anomalies. Multiple passengers had been reassigned mid-boarding without documentation. At least one case involved a minor who had paid for a first-class seat, just like her. Only difference? This one didn't make the news. Yet. That night, Elodie made a single call to Equisure's Executive Policy Division. "Hi, it's Elodie. I think we're being ignored on purpose." "Go on," said the voice on the other end. "I need authorization to audit non-compliant carriers through public passenger incident records." "You're requesting a Tier 2 surveillance release?" "Yes." Long pause. "You understand what that does, right?" Elodie stared out the window, her voice quiet but firm. "If they won't listen to the accord, then we show the world what happens when they ignore it." Within 48 hours, Equisure released a quiet but devastating statement. Carriers found non-compliant with the Passenger Fairness Accord will be subject to behavioral risk scoring transparency, publicly available on consumer booking platforms. They called it Ethics Visibility Mode. Skylynx's ethics rating dropped from 92 to 64 in under 6 hours. Passengers began canceling. Influencers posted about switching carriers. One mom on TikTok said, "If they can't treat a kid with a paid ticket right, I'm not trusting them with my family in the sky." The message was clear. No more hiding. At first, Skylynx tried damage control. They published a tone-deaf ad campaign. "Everyone deserves a seat. Skylynx is learning." But the comments didn't hold back. "No, you're just embarrassed you got caught. Where's your apology to the girl? Your score dropped for a reason. Own it." Then came the investor calls. Skylynx's board had been pressured by stakeholders to show compliance by end of quarter. That's when Elodie got a message. Encrypted, anonymous. Just one line. "They're about to spin this against you. Be ready." 2 days later, a Skylynx affiliate blog published a profile piece on Elodie. It painted her as a privileged corporate child with access most children would never have. They used words like weaponized influence, manufactured activism, corporate grooming. It was calculated, targeted, designed to sway public perception, especially among older, skeptical audiences. For a moment, it worked. The comment section turned, "Why is a kid dictating airline policies? This feels orchestrated. She's being used by her mom's company." Elodie didn't flinch. She just opened a folder on her laptop labeled Unreleased Ethics Reports. She picked one. Flight number 2283, Frankfurt to Toronto. Passenger, 14-year-old South Asian girl. Incident, removed from seat for passenger comfort reassignment. No justification recorded. That was enough. Elodie drafted a single post. "I'm not special. I just knew how to file a report. But every kid who's been removed, downgraded, or dismissed without cause deserves better. So, here's what we're doing next." Attached was a link to a public archive of anonymized ethics violations pulled from the Accord's compliance data. Within 24 hours, it had 8.1 million views. The tide turned. Again, celebrities reposted. Parents shared stories. A senator tweeted, "If airlines won't enforce fairness, maybe it's time we make it law." Under pressure, 3 more airlines signed the Accord. And Skylynx? They issued a formal apology, on camera, by the CEO, to Elodie, and to every child denied dignity at 30,000 feet. Later that night, Marianne sat beside her daughter on the balcony. City lights blinked below. Quiet. Peaceful. "You did it again," Marianne said softly. Elodie didn't smile. "Not yet. This isn't finished." "What's left?" Elodie looked up at the stars. "We've shown what they did. Now we show them what they can become, if they do it right." The ethics score of Skylynx had barely recovered from its dip into the 60s when something unprecedented happened. Elodie received a sealed, hand-delivered envelope. From where? The United Nations Council for Human Dignity in Transit. Inside was a formal invitation. "We request your presence as an advisory speaker for the Global Transit Ethics Symposium in Geneva. You may attend as a minor delegate or nominate an adult to speak on your behalf. Your draft of the Passenger Fairness Accord has prompted international dialogue." Marianne read it twice. "Elodie, that's not just aviation anymore, that's cross-industry." Elodie nodded, slow but steady. "This isn't just about planes. It's about being seen." The Geneva invite wasn't the only one. Over the next 2 weeks, requests flooded in from the EU Commission on Youth Rights in Infrastructure, the Department of Transportation in the US, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, several airport boards in South Africa, Japan, and Brazil. Each wanted to learn one thing: How had a 13-year-old drafted a protocol that reshaped global passenger policy? But the truth? She hadn't done it alone. Back in Frankfurt, Elodie gathered her team. Not executives, not lawyers, but a private room of 6. Each a specialist in a forgotten field. Bianca, 58, an ex-flight attendant turned behavioral linguistics expert. Amir, 32, a privacy tech architect who helped code Skynet's early access system. Jules, 45, a whistleblower protection advisor who'd once sued his own airline. Devin, 19, a young activist who'd been removed from a plane for wearing a hoodie. And of course, Elodie, the spark that brought them all together. They didn't call it a startup or a coalition. They called it the Visibility Project. The goal was simple: create a public-facing version of the Passenger Fairness Index, one that could live outside Equasure and couldn't be buried, censored, or stalled. The working name? Clear Flight. Jules raised the key question. But how do we keep it objective? They'll say it's just revenge dressed up as reform. Elodie answered without flinching. We don't use opinion, we use patterns. We don't punish, we spotlight. Bianca helped map behavioral language patterns in crew reports. Rena fed in thousands of anonymized data points from international incidents. Amir built a layered ethics detection engine that cross-referenced tone, timing, and ticket class decisions. The key feature? Passenger Parity Score, PPS, a live score for airlines that reflected how equally they treated passengers across age, race, gender, and economic status. It wasn't intrusive. It wasn't political. It was pure reflection. Mirror meet system. Word of Clear Flight spread fast. Some airlines tried to get ahead of the curve. One Asian carrier reached out first. Can we test Clear Flight across our Tokyo-Seattle route? Then another from Scandinavia. We'd like to pilot PPS with real-time feedback screens in our check-in system. Elodie said yes, but with one rule. You don't get to hide the score. At first, passengers didn't notice much. But then, a travel influencer posted a 12-second video. Wait, so this airline has a passenger parity score next to the boarding gate? That video hit 11 million views. And suddenly, ethics became part of the flight experience. Travelers started sharing their flight score like they did with seat upgrades. PPS 9700 felt like I mattered. PPS 59. They made my grandma switch seats for balance. No thanks. PPS 85. The flight attendant apologized for the delay and offered snacks without me asking. Respect. Backroom resistance began bubbling again. An internal memo from a major U.S. carrier leaked. The spread of PPS threatens to frame us as unfair in a subjective environment. Consider litigation options if adoption becomes mandated. But that memo backfired. The Passenger Advocacy Alliance, a coalition of families, seniors, and veterans, publicly endorsed Clear Flight. If fairness is threatening, you might be the problem. Meanwhile, Elodie stayed quiet. No more interviews, no podcasts, no public hand-waving, just code, data, strategy. Until one afternoon, Marianne found her at the dining table, cross-checking PPS data from 14 airlines. Elodie, are you okay? You've barely looked up in 3 hours. I'm good, Elodie said, sipping her now cold tea. We're about to finish the first full global index map. Marianne leaned over. What will it show? Elodie paused. Where fairness actually lives, and where it's still faking it. 1 week later, at the Geneva Symposium, Elodie walked on stage. Not in a suit. In jeans, sneakers, and a sweatshirt that simply read, "Visibility is accountability." Her opening slide showed a world map with glowing dots. Each dot pulsed with a PPS score. Canada, 92 Germany, 88 United Kingdom, 73 Brazil, 85 United States, 62. Gasps rippled through the room. She let the silence hang. This isn't a ranking, she said calmly. This is a reflection. You can't argue with a mirror. You can only decide if you like what you see. No one moved. Then, slowly, hands began to clap, one after another, until the entire room stood. Not because she was a kid, not because she'd gone viral, but because she'd held up the truth in a way the system couldn't ignore. Elodie was in the middle of testing a new clear flight alert system when Rena stormed into the office holding her tablet like it was radioactive. "You need to see this," she said, voice clipped. Elodie blinked, eyes still on her laptop. "Is it another flagged PPS dip?" "No, it's bigger, way bigger." Rena turned the screen toward her. It was a leaked document. Internal correspondence from a US-based airline consortium called AeroCorps. The title, Strategic Containment of the Passenger Parity Index. Elodie's stomach dropped. She read every line. It wasn't just pushback. It was planned sabotage. The document detailed how AeroCorps intended to flood the PPS system with false data, masking discriminatory behavior with manipulated feedback loops. Their plan involved deploying fake passenger accounts to spam the system with high ethics scores, bribing third-party review platforms to withhold or bury negative ethics incidents, pushing for data fatigue laws under the guise of digital privacy to block transparency APIs. Worst of all, they'd hired a PR firm to discredit Clearflight and Elodie herself, framing it as activist interference in free enterprise. Rena watched Elodie's face harden. "They're not just fighting back," she said. "They're going to war." For the first time in weeks, Elodie didn't speak right away. She just stared, not in fear, in calculation. "They're scared," she finally said. "Of what?" Elodie turned slowly to the whiteboard behind her and drew one word: unbuyable. That's what they can't handle. A system they can't rig. The team assembled that evening in Frankfurt. Jules laid it out plain. "They're exploiting the fact that we're not backed by law. They think we're just a ratings app with good PR." Bianca folded her arms. "So, what's the move?" Elodie stood. "We don't just defend the system, we codify it." She pointed to the word she'd written earlier. "We draft the Passenger Rights Transparency Act. And we do it now." Within 72 hours, they'd done the impossible. Using real case data, survivor testimonies, and existing FAA and ICAO statutes, they drafted a legal framework that made passenger parity scores part of formal safety and dignity evaluations, protected whistleblowers in aviation services reporting ethics violations, mandated algorithmic audit trails for seat assignments, upgrades, and removals, penalized carriers for tampering with transparency platforms. They sent the draft to key allies, senators, regulators, and public watchdog groups. The reaction? Stunning. One senior official in Brussels called it the most elegant convergence of justice and infrastructure we've ever seen. But AeroCorps wasn't sleeping. 3 days after the PRTA draft was leaked to the press, smear campaigns began surfacing. Anonymous blogs accused Clearflight of stealing data from children. Right-wing pundits labeled Elodie a corporate puppet with a woke agenda. Memes circulated with photoshopped images of Elodie in dictator uniforms. The final blow? Clearflight's servers were hit with a massive DDoS attack, rendering the site unusable for 16 hours. It was brutal, but it was also a mistake, because they'd done it too late. During that same 16-hour window, a viral moment unfolded online. A retired airline captain named Maurice Langley, 72, posted a video on X. "I flew commercial jets for 38 years. I've seen discrimination in the sky. I've been ordered to move black grandmothers to the back row. I've seen teens separated from parents for balance. What Elodie's doing isn't radical. It's overdue. And shame on any company trying to shut her down." That video hit 12.4 million views in 8 hours. And just like that, the public turned again. Media outlets ran the story. Former pilots break silence. Systemic ethics failures in aviation exposed. Senator Maria Castillo introduced the Passenger Rights Transparency Act on the Senate floor. If we can rate hotels, cars, and even food delivery drivers, we sure as hell can rate how passengers are treated at 30,000 feet. The hearing room filled. Reporters called it the most emotionally charged testimony since the Airline Deregulation Act. Parents, veterans, students, nurses, people from every walk of life came forward to share moments they thought were isolated. Turns out, they weren't. Back in Frankfurt, Elodie sat alone in the darkened office. Not because she was scared, but because the storm had finally broken. Marianne walked in, holding a mug of chamomile tea. "You okay?" Elodie nodded slowly. "It's not about me anymore." Her voice was quiet, almost reverent. "It's about making it so nobody ever has to be me." The next morning, the ClearFlight site came back online. Not just restored, reinforced. Amir had spent all night building a decentralized mirror network, making it impossible to take the system down again. "We're bulletproof now," he said, exhausted but smiling. Elodie simply nodded. "We had to be." That same day, a major airline, previously neutral, preemptively adopted the entire PRTA protocol, publicly pledging, "We believe ethics should be as standard as safety belts." Their passenger parity score jumped 18 points in 1 week. Competitors followed. Investors took notice. Stock prices began to correlate with PPS. The index was no longer activist interference. It was market reality. 3 days later, Aerocorps tried one last move. They filed a legal challenge in an international trade court, arguing that the PRTA restricted commercial freedom. The court's response? Unexpectedly swift. They threw it out. Ethical transparency in passenger services is neither optional nor obstructive. It is overdue. The ruling sent shockwaves through the industry. Every airline under Aerocorps' umbrella lost 3 to 7 points on the PPS overnight. Elodie didn't celebrate. She didn't post. She didn't brag. She walked into her room, pulled the curtains, and opened a message from a girl in South Korea. "They asked me to move for a white businessman. I showed them your site. They backed off. Thank you." That was enough. Elodie didn't flinch when the video call came from Washington, D.C. The seal in the corner read Federal Aviation Administration. But what caught her attention more was the name beneath it. Dr. Lydia Morse, Chief Ethics Liaison, FAA. "Ms. Harrington," the woman said, smiling politely, "we'd like to invite you to participate in something unprecedented." Elodie, now seated at a long table in Frankfurt with her team behind her, tilted her head. "Define unprecedented." Morse's tone shifted, more serious now. "The FAA and ICAO are jointly convening an International Airspace Ethics Council. You're not being asked to speak. You're being asked to help design the framework." Dead silence in the room. Jules was the first to exhale. "You're rewriting the global rule book." Elodie just nodded. In Geneva, 1 week later, she stepped onto neutral ground, but the atmosphere was anything but. Every major airline CEO was present. So were regulators from the EU, Japan, Australia, and the African Union. Uniformed pilots, union reps, insurance brokers, even airport CEOs. The name card in front of her didn't say activist or student. It said, Elodie Harrington, Independent System Architect, Passenger Ethics. It was official, and some of them hated it. The first session was cold. A South American airline rep muttered, "We're really letting a child lecture us about fairness?" The moderator ignored it, but Elodie didn't. When it was her turn to speak, she stood and said plainly, "You can call me a child, but it was your systems that failed. Not once, thousands of times, in silence, until a child broke that silence." She sat, and the room did too, metaphorically. Over the next 5 days, she outlined a tiered passenger ethics matrix. adaptable by culture but standardized by baseline rights. A real-time disparity monitor run by a decentralized body, not airlines themselves. Mandatory reporting channels for ethics violations, audited quarterly by third-party coalitions. The establishment of an ethics flag protocol, which allowed passengers to digitally signal unfair treatment without confrontation. A global transparency dashboard, ranking carriers not by marketing promises, but by actual ethical behavior. Each piece was backed by data, not just emotion, and that made it bulletproof. Pushback came, of course. One European exec asked smugly, "And if a child lies to manipulate the system?" Elodie didn't blink. "You're already afraid of passengers being heard. Imagine if you had to prove every action was fair, not just convenient." Her calm made him shift in his chair. That's what made her dangerous. She didn't argue. She dismantled. On the fourth day, something happened that no one expected. Captain Linus Graf, a legendary German pilot known for flying presidents and Olympic teams, stood up from the back. Gray hair, steady voice. He cleared his throat. "In 1997, I removed a Nigerian doctor from first class because a white couple complained. No policy required me to do it. I did it because I knew no one would stop me. That was wrong, and it stayed wrong for 26 years, until today." He turned to Elodie. "We built the skies for speed. You reminded us to build them for people." The room stood, some with pride, some with guilt, but all in acknowledgement. Back in her hotel room that night, Elodie finally let herself cry. Not from weakness, from release. Because this time, the silence wasn't loneliness. It was respect. 2 weeks later, ICAO and FAA jointly announced the formal ratification of the Global Passenger Ethics Accord, GPEA. Key elements included adoption of the Passenger Fairness Index, based on Elodie's PPS model, across 72 member countries. The establishment of the SkySure Council, a rotating ethics oversight body, with Elodie offered a permanent advisory seat. Requirement that all airlines accepting international insurance must maintain a minimum ethics score, or risk losing access to global terminals. Overnight, over 14 major airlines had to suspend certain international routes to comply. Media exploded. Headlines ran, "13-year-old who changed the skies. From seat 36F to global stage, the Elodie effect. Sky justice is no longer optional." But Elodie didn't do interviews. She declined talk shows, ignored branding deals, even refused a book offer titled "The Girl Who Grounded Airlines." She wasn't building a brand. She was building a standard. At the same time, public engagement spiked. Passengers began checking their airline's PPS score before booking, like they would check safety ratings or COVID policies. ClearFlight's mobile app hit 23 million downloads in under a month. But Elodie knew popularity was fleeting. Institutional change was what mattered. So she and Rena worked quietly behind the scenes, preparing a new model, flight fairness for families, which would allow guardians to report on behalf of children, elders, and non-English speakers who may not feel safe speaking up. Because power wasn't just about being loud. Sometimes it meant amplifying the quiet. One morning, while reviewing satellite feed traffic of the new SkySure aligned terminals, Elodie received an email from Dr. Lydia Morse. Subject, GPEA Addendum. Honorary naming request. She clicked it open. "We would like to formally propose renaming Terminal 3 at JFK International Airport as the Elodie Harrington Concourse for Passenger Justice." Elodie just stared at it. Not smiling, not reacting, just feeling it settle. It wasn't about a name. It was about what that name stood for, and how many people it now stood with. At first, it was just a rumor, a whisper in a hangar, a side conversation at a gate. Then it hit the forum boards. How did Skynova jump 12 PPS points overnight? My friend works at Turbine Air. Their exec said the ethics review was handled. Someone's buying silence again. Elodie didn't want to believe it. But when she pulled the raw data behind ClearFlight's recent score fluctuations, the red flags were impossible to ignore. 3 major airlines had spikes in their passenger parity scores, without a corresponding drop in flagged incidents. In fact, whistleblower reports had quietly gone up. They were cheating the system. Rena said it first. "They're gaming us." Jules nodded grimly. "They're using bots, or worse, internal reviewer manipulation. They're reclassifying discriminatory events as passenger behavior issues." It was legalese wrapped in poison. Elodie closed her laptop, jaw set. "They're using technicalities to stay ethical on paper." The silence in the room was thick, not of fear, of disgust. She stood, pacing once. "They want loopholes?" She turned. "Let's seal them shut." What followed wasn't a software update. It was a full-scale architectural shift. They called it Project Reveal. Responsive Ethics Validation Engine using active learning. It was designed to do one thing: audit the audit. ClearFlight now deployed a shadow AI system parallel to its public dashboard. For every reported ethics incident, the system cross-referenced time-stamped passenger movement logs, audio transcripts from cabin crew when available, in-flight Wi-Fi behavior metadata, discrepancies between manual override and actual seat change logs. The system didn't look for patterns of kindness. It looked for silence around cruelty. Within days, the AI found anomalies. Example 1. A teen boy was reassigned mid-flight for safety reasons, but the logs showed no turbulence, no weight shift, no row behavior issue. Example 2. A woman was denied boarding due to passport confusion, yet her travel records were clean, and her ethnicity was listed on the override note. ClearFlight's public data showed green. Project Reveal showed red. Elodie didn't go to the media. She went to Sky Shore Council, and this time, she brought the receipts. The meeting in Zurich was supposed to be private, but when word leaked that Elodie would be confronting airline CEOs with data proving deliberate ethics score manipulation, reporters gathered outside in the rain. Elodie entered the room not as a child, not even as a system architect. She walked in like a compliance hawk. Each rep was handed a sealed envelope. Inside, a 2-page summary of violations, line by line, time-stamped, verified. "I'm not here to accuse," she said quietly. "I'm here to restore." It wasn't smooth. The rep from Skynova tried to discredit her team. "We hired a third-party verifier. AI can misinterpret nuance." Elodie looked at him flatly. "Ethics isn't nuance when a passenger's voice is muted." Another executive sneered. "You want perfection. That's not realistic." Her reply was cold. "I don't want perfection. I want honesty. If you're not ready for that, maybe you shouldn't fly at all." 1 hour later, the Sky Shore Council issued a vote. 8 airlines flagged for systemic data manipulation, $170 million in ethics insurance penalties, activated 3 airports, paused priority access lanes for flagged carriers. A new protocol was launched. Ethics Cross-Audit Mandate. All major airlines must allow third-party systems like Reveal to cross-check internal logs every 90 days. Within 48 hours, stock prices wobbled. Shareholders filed emergency motions. But public response? Explosive. The hashtag #HadToRevealTheFlight went viral. People shared their silent moments, being asked to move, being stared at, being ignored, being told, "You're just overreacting." Elodie posted just one sentence on ClearFlight's social feed. "You weren't overreacting. The system was underreporting." It was reshared 9.1 million times. The media came again, but this time they weren't praising her. They were asking the hard questions. Are we flying inside a lie? Is the ethics system broken already? Who watches the watchers? Elodie responded in one word: we do. Then she launched the ClearFlight Community Board, a space where verified passengers and staff could co-report, dispute, or flag suspicious actions without retaliation. Within a week, Over 19,000 corrections were submitted to historical ethics records. The platform had grown teeth. At the next Skyshore Summit, Elodie was asked if she'd consider a paid role leading the entire ethics compliance division. She declined. Systems are strongest when not owned by the people they govern. But she did nominate someone, Captain Maurice Langley, the retired pilot who'd once stood in shame, but now stood for accountability. Let someone who's failed guard others from it. Back in Frankfurt, the team gathered around Rena's desk. The latest reveal report was in. Ethics manipulation attempts, down 67% manual override justifications, down 82% whistleblower reports, up 110% in the best way. People weren't scared anymore. They were speaking up, and the system listened back. That night, Elodie sat by her window. No laptop, no reports, just a cup of mint tea. The stars overhead looked different now. Not safer, not cleaner, but watched, accountable, shared. She didn't clean the skies. She made it impossible to pretend they were clean when they weren't. And in some ways, that was the real justice. Tell us where you're watching from, and what moment made you realize silence wasn't an option anymore. For 3 days, headlines circled the globe. East Wing Airlines refuses reveal access citing sovereignty. National Airline denies ethics tampering, blames AI bias. Global oversight hits wall of national pride. Elodie had seen it coming. East Wing wasn't just any airline. It was a state-owned carrier backed by a powerful government that didn't appreciate its internal systems being audited by a 13-year-old girl from Toronto. At least not publicly. They had ignored her quietly for months, refusing API integrations, submitting falsified ethics logs, refusing third-party verification. But once Reveal exposed a pattern of discriminatory rerouting involving elderly passengers and migrant workers, the blowback came swift. Not with words, with politics. The rejection letter from East Wing's legal office was laced with jargon. Due to national data protection laws and aviation sovereignty protocols, we are unable to allow external systems to access passenger classification logs, in-flight reassignment rationale, or onboard crew accountability audits, my man. Translation: you caught us. Now we're hiding behind a flag. What's the move? Jules asked across the table in their Zurich operations hub. Do we name them outright? Rena added. Go public? Leak everything? Elodie didn't answer right away. She was staring at the world map on the digital wall, dozens of airline ethics scores pulsing live, her eyes locked on the East Wing routes. Going public doesn't make them transparent, she finally said. It makes them defensive. So what then? Jules asked. She leaned forward. We take it to the people who gave them the runway to begin with. 3 weeks later, Elodie sat before the International Civil Aviation Organization's Global Ethics Assembly. Every nation, every airline, every regulatory body. She was the youngest person in the room by 4 decades. The flags behind her weren't just decoration. They were boundaries, landlines of pride, walls built over time. And yet, she stood anyway. My name is Elodie Harrington. I am not from a nation-state. I represent passengers, the quiet ones, the displaced, the silenced. The murmurs began instantly. Some rolled eyes. Some whispered into translator earpieces. She waited, then continued. When a government says ethics oversight is a violation of sovereignty, I ask you, whose sovereignty? The systems or the passengers? A stillness rippled. She pulled up 3 case studies. A refugee child denied boarding despite verified asylum travel documents. A blind passenger reassigned mid-flight from first class because their service dog made another traveler uncomfortable. A flight attendant marked as resigned voluntarily after flagging a crew leader's slur, only to be blacklisted across all domestic routes. All logged, all buried, all from East Wing. Elodie didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth had weight. East Wing's director of compliance, A stone-faced man in a crisp blue suit stood next. He accused Elodie of foreign data interference, cultural insensitivity, weaponizing digital perception. Then came the punch. No sovereign nation should allow a foreign teenager to decide what's ethical within its borders. The room shifted. Some nodded. Some winced. Elodie stared at him a beat, then replied, "You're not afraid of a teenager. You're afraid of a mirror." The vote to determine whether Reveal could remain a mandatory compliance tool for global insurance access was scheduled for the next day. If it failed, all her work, Project Reveal, PPS scores, SkySure protocols, could be labeled optional again. The world would return to performance ethics, to polished lies, and passengers would never know when the sky turned against them. That night, Rena found her alone in the observation deck overlooking the runways. "Elodie," she said softly, "what if we lose this vote?" Elodie didn't look away from the tarmac. "Then we rebuild it again, from the ground up." "But you've already done so much." Elodie nodded slowly. "And they've already undone so much more." The next morning, something unexpected happened. A delegation of 14 retired pilots and crew members from across 9 nations filed into the assembly. None were official reps, but each had flown for 30-plus years. They spoke one by one. Captain Linus Graff, again. First Officer Melinda Zhou, fired for speaking up in 2016. Flight Attendant Pierre Doucet, who broke protocol to protect a disabled passenger in 2008. They each said the same thing. "We weren't allowed to speak when it mattered. This system gave us our voices back." When they finished, no one clapped, but no one interrupted either. Then, from the back, someone stood. It was Nashita Rafiq, a former East Wing senior analyst who had quietly resigned after a series of cover-ups. She approached the podium with shaking hands. "I signed NDAs. I signed loyalty pledges. But none of them can stop me from telling the truth now." She paused, then raised a tablet. "I have logs. I have override data. I have the timestamps of every falsified crew behavior review for the last 18 months. Gasps. Someone tried to object, but it was too late. The room shifted again, only this time toward accountability. The vote passed. 87-6. Reveal was no longer optional. It became the first mandatory cross-national ethics system in modern aviation history. Any airline wishing to receive international insurance, terminal clearance, or airspace partnership had to comply. With full transparency. East Wing, they walked out. But 3 weeks later, they returned. Quietly. No cameras, just a signed agreement. Because passengers had started boycotting, and silence had become too expensive. Back in Toronto, Elodie sat with her mother in the garden, watching the wind move the leaves. "You did it," Marianne said, pouring tea. Elodie smiled faintly. "No, we made it so they can't undo it." That was the point. It was never about winning. It was about making injustice unwinnable. 3 months passed. 3 silent, seismic, world-shifting months. The skies hadn't looked different to most passengers. Planes still flew. Gates still changed. Flight attendants still said, "Welcome aboard." But underneath it all, something fundamental had changed. The Passenger Fairness Index, PFI, had gone live. Not just in Clearflight, not just in Zurich, not just in the ethical bubble that Elodie and her team had lived in. No, this time, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, had made it a clause. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, had codified it. The Asia-Pacific Transport Alliance, the European Aviation Board, and even the Middle East Civil Sky Council followed suit. No Passenger Fairness Index, no Certificate of Operation. At a press conference in Washington, D.C., the FAA spokesperson stood beside a simple podium with 5 words printed across the front. No compliance, no clearance, no flight. Behind him, a screen displayed the new global certification dashboard, each airline listed by name, each colored bar showing their ethics compliance score. Green meant fly. Yellow meant investigate. Red meant suspend. 6 airlines had already been grounded that week. 2 more were under emergency review. No press statement could clean it up. Only real behavior could. Elodie didn't attend the press event. She was in Geneva, meeting with ICAO's Data Integrity Board, finalizing the Fairness Score Interpretation Guidelines. "We can't let airlines hide behind numbers again," she told the committee. "A score of 89 can't mean we looked ethical. It has to mean something concrete." They agreed. Every incident now required a resolution path. No pending indefinitely. No review in progress that never came. Passengers could now see if their complaint led to action or didn't. The silence was measurable now. And that changed everything. The true power of the PFI wasn't just in scoring airlines. It was in how the scores influenced everything else. Airport slot allocation. Top-scoring airlines got priority gates. Government contracts, defense, federal, or diplomatic travel had to use green line carriers. Insurance premiums. Carriers with poor scores saw their monthly costs surge by 14 to 26%. Investment eligibility. Major pension and ESG funds were barred from investing in airlines flagged red. It was karma at the infrastructure level, not a viral takedown. A systemic reshaping. Jules grinned the day it became real. He showed Elodie a contract clause from a major Asian investment group. "As part of our 2026 due diligence process, the board reserves the right to suspend all funding to any aviation partner whose passenger fairness index drops below 82 for more than 2 quarters. Elodie read it twice, then leaned back. "We're not enforcing morality. We've made fairness profitable." Rena had been working on a case study of flight route approvals in the EU. In just 6 weeks, she said, ethics compliance became a bidding advantage. Some airlines are lowering prices to compete, but others are raising their fairness index to win routes. A reverse race, not to the bottom, but to the better. At home, Elodie's inbox began to fill with letters, not from CEOs or regulators, but from flight attendants, from passengers, from quiet people who'd never spoken up before. "Your system flagged the gate agent who always bumped older women to the back. I finally saw someone say something when I was denied boarding. I wasn't afraid to file the report, because now it matters." She never replied with long answers. She didn't have to. The system was speaking for her now, but not everyone welcomed it. In a luxury hotel suite in Dubai, a group of airline executives from non-aligned carriers met to discuss a workaround. "Can we use national jurisdiction to override a red score? What if we launch our own ethical compliance platform? Do we sue SkySure for monopolization?" They didn't know that someone in the room, an assistant they'd barely noticed, was live streaming the whole conversation. Within hours, the video had 5.3 million views. The comments were brutal. "So they're planning the next lie in business class? If your ethics plan is a PR stunt, sit down. Passengers aren't props." A week later, SkySure released the ethics seal. It wasn't for airlines. It was for people, gate agents, pilots, crew members. Any aviation worker could apply to be individually scored, based on real interaction data, passenger feedback, peer reports, and behavioral metrics. It wasn't about shaming. It was about recognizing quiet integrity. Within 2 months, 29,000 workers had applied. 12,000 had already earned the first tier seal. A few dozen reached Tier 3, the Platinum Integrity Badge. Elodie insisted it stay anonymous. No names on leaderboards. The sky shouldn't turn into a stage. It should feel like a promise. By winter, the new ethics standard had a nickname, the Elodie Protocol. She hated it, but she couldn't stop it. Not when passengers started saying things like, "This airline's on the Elodie list." "Don't worry, they're fairness compliant. I reported it, and they fixed it. I guess the Elodie thing works." It wasn't fame she wanted. It was friction removal. The quiet passengers, the ignored complaints, the families split across cabins, the random selections that weren't random. Now, they had a place to land and stay. One snowy morning in Toronto, Elodie sat at a cafe alone, waiting for a call from Geneva. A woman in her 60s approached her table. "Are you the girl from the airline videos?" Elodie looked up. "I guess." The woman smiled kindly. "I was once told I couldn't board unless I changed my blouse. They said it was policy. It wasn't. I didn't know how to fight it then." She paused. "But now, someone would know, right?" Elodie nodded. Someone would know. The woman patted her hand. "You made dignity traceable." It was a quiet morning in Toronto when Elodie packed the last box. She stood in the middle of the office, the same sunlit corner room she had designed herself 2 years earlier, when Project Reveal was still just a tangle of code and stubborn hope. The room was mostly empty now. No more dashboards on the walls, no live flight trackers blinking every time a crew decision triggered a yellow flag. No whiteboards covered in formulaic ethics logic. Just a single chair, a folded hoodie, and a photo of the first Skyshore team, all grinning, all tired. Elodie took one last look, then closed the door. She didn't announce her departure. No LinkedIn post, no interview, no farewell live stream. She just left. The system didn't need her anymore. The Passenger Fairness Index was now automated, reviewed quarterly by a global oversight committee. Every airport in the top 100 had a compliance kiosk. Every airline knew that a red score didn't mean a warning. It meant exposure. It meant consequence. It meant you're not above the people who paid to be here. That was enough. Back at home, she placed the old Skyshore badge in a drawer next to her middle school math trophies and a flight ticket from her first solo trip. She kept the badge, but she didn't need to wear it anymore. Rena messaged that night. "They're naming the new AI ethics model after you, ELO3. Jules added, "You gonna at least tweet about it?" She just replied with a smile emoji, then turned off her phone. For the first time in a long time, she went outside without a hoodie or sunglasses. No one recognized her, and for the first time, she liked it that way. She sat in a corner cafe, ordered a mint tea, and watched 2 little girls run past her, laughing, dragging tiny rolling suitcases with rainbow stickers. Their mother scolded gently. "Stay close, don't bump people." Elodie smiled. She remembered what it felt like to bump someone in first class and feel like you were the one doing something wrong. A week later, a small story made global news. A retired pilot was reinstated after being wrongly blacklisted for defending a teenage girl's right to her seat. The girl's name wasn't published, but those who knew, knew. Someone posted a clip from years ago. Elodie, walking past gate security with a boarding pass clenched tight in her fist. The voiceover said, "They told her she didn't belong. Now they check their policies twice before saying that again." One evening, her mother called her over. "Elodie, you might want to turn on the TV." She did. It was the Global Aviation Awards, usually boring, full of sponsor praise and shiny sound bites. But this year was different. The host paused mid-script and looked straight into the camera. "For the first time in our industry's history, we're awarding a citation not for lifetime flying, but for lifetime impact. Not to a captain, not to a CEO, but to someone who changed how we define fairness in the sky." There was silence in the room. The host continued. "To the passenger who stood up by sitting down, to the voice behind Reveal, to the designer of the Passenger Fairness Index, Elodie Harrington." No nickname, no headline, no sensationalism, just her name. Said clean, said right. She didn't go to the ceremony, but when the clip hit social media, something strange happened. Instead of clapping emojis or confetti gifs, people shared their own stories. "They didn't bump me this time. I wore my headscarf and no one said a thing." My son sat in first class and didn't flinch when they checked his ticket. He knew he belonged. And again, no one tagged her. No one had to. Her name was a system now, not a girl. The final note came weeks later, a handwritten letter, no return address, just a short message. I was on your flight, the day they tried to move you. I didn't speak up. I wish I had. Thank you for doing what the rest of us were too afraid to do. You didn't raise your voice, but you raised the bar. Elodie folded the letter slowly, placed it beside her old boarding pass, then poured herself some tea and sat quietly by the window. Outside, another plane flew overhead. For the first time, she didn't look up with anger or sadness or even purpose. She just looked. The sky didn't need her to fight anymore, because it had finally learned how to listen. Have you ever stayed silent when you wish you hadn't? Or spoke up when it changed everything? Tell us where you're watching from, and tell us the moment you knew silence wasn't an option anymore. We read every story. We hold them close.